I'm Daisy Richards and welcome to Friday's edition of the Regional News. We begin with news from Cuba. Water shortages in Cuba are increasingly flaring tempers, including in capital Havana, as problems mount for hundreds of thousands of residents already ragged from shortfalls in food, fuel, and electricity. Upwards of 600,000 people, more than 1 in 20 on the Caribbean island of 10 million citizens, are suffering from water supply issues, officials said earlier this month. Havana is the worst affected by water shortages, though most of the country's largest cities report over 30,000 customers without water, the government has said. Officials blame the growing problems on crumbling infrastructure and a persistent lack of fuel, symptoms of a festering economic crisis that has blighted growth and left the communist-run country nearly bankrupt. Rachel Tremino, 32, said the root causes are no mystery, even in her Havana neighborhood of Vidado, a comparatively upscale district of the capital. The problem defies quick fixes. Spare parts for outdated water infrastructure like pipes and pumps are in short supply, officials said. And without fuel, the adequate transportation, even emergency water supply by cistern truck, has been limited, according to residents. Frequent blackouts only make matters worse. Isolated protests have erupted in some areas as residents, overwhelmed by the growing list of problems and shortages, lose patience in the still blistering heat of the tropical summer. Cuba's economy has been disseminated by a combination of factors, including the COVID-19 pandemic, stiffened U.S. sanctions, and a state-dominated business model plagued by bureaucracy, mismanagement, and corruption. The social and economic crisis is widely seen as among the worst since Fidel Castro's 1959 revolution, leading to a record-breaking exodus of Cuban migrants in the past 2 years. While in Mexico, authorities in the western Mexican state of Sinaloa on Thursday canceled National Day celebrations and shut schools on the back of escalating violence stemming from internal Sinaloa cartel fighting, which has left 12 people dead since Monday. Shootouts, the sound of gunfire, and burnt-out vehicles has become a common sight in the state capital, Culiacan, a city of nearly 1 million people. Videos posted on social media show convoys of heavily armed gunmen driving down major thoroughfares in Sinaloa, where many businesses have also had to close. Tensions between the two most powerful factions of the Sinaloa cartel had been rising since late July, when trafficker and leader of one of those groupings, Ismael El Mayo Zambada, was arrested in the United States. The cartel leader, believed to be in his mid-70s, alleges that a senior member of the Los Chapitos, another faction of the cartel, kidnapped him and then flew him to the United States against his will. Ruben Rochamoya, announcing the suspension of schools and National Day celebrations scheduled for September 15th, said he was concerned about security and children and young people. For some international news, the Biden administration said on Thursday it was imposing U.S. sanctions on 16 allies of Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro in response to voter fraud in the country's election and his government's ensuing crackdown on the political opposition. The move came just days after Edmundo Gonzalez, recognized by the U.S. and other countries as winner of the July 28th presidential election, fled to Spain after Maduro's government issued a warrant for the opposition leader's arrest. Among those targeted for sanctions were Supreme Court President Carosila Rodriguez, Electoral Council Director Rosalba Gil, and National Assembly Vice President Pedro Infante. The list includes others linked to the election, as well as military and intelligence officials accused of post-election repression. As part of the first punitive U.S. measures in response to Maduro's disputed re-election claim, Secretary of State Antony Blinken said Washington was also imposing visa restrictions on an unspecified number of, quote, Maduro-aligned, unquote, officials. President Joe Biden's administration is seeking to punish Maduro and his loyalists for what the US sees as reneging on the promise of a competitive democratic vote, while also pressuring him into negotiations with the opposition. The US official insisted the sanctions were an important step in an effort to pressure Maduro to, quote, make better decisions, unquote, Venezuela's political situation before the presidential inauguration in January. Washington, which rejected Maduro's 2018 re-election as a sham, broadly eased sanctions on Venezuela's oil industry last October in response to a deal between Maduro and opposition parties. But in April, the US reimposed the sanctions, accusing Maduro of failing to meet most of his electoral commitments. Thank you for watching. Do have a great weekend. Until next time.